There is a moment in every person's life when they have to confront a difficult question. How much of my life is actually being directed by me, and how much is being directed by the opinions of other people? Most people never seriously examine this question. They make decisions not because they believe those decisions are right, but because they anticipate how others will react. They choose the safer career, the acceptable relationship, the respectable lifestyle. They remain silent when they want to speak and speak when they should remain silent. If your sense of worth depends on approval, you have unknowingly given other people control over your emotional state. One compliment can elevate you, one criticism can destroy your mood, one person ignoring you can make you question yourself. You become psychologically dependent on external signals. The deeper problem is that human beings are naturally social creatures. We are trained from childhood to seek acceptance because belonging once had enormous survival value, but what was useful for survival can become a psychological weakness in adulthood. Real confidence requires something more difficult: developing an internal authority. This does not mean becoming arrogant or refusing to listen to anyone. In fact, genuine confidence allows you to listen carefully because you are not threatened by disagreement. You can consider criticism without immediately obeying it. You can accept advice without surrendering your judgment. You can change your mind without feeling that you have lost your identity. The distinction is subtle but powerful. An insecure person asks, "What do I believe is the correct thing to do?" knowing that some people may not approve. That second question changes everything. It forces you to take responsibility, and responsibility is one of the foundations of psychological strength. Once you understand that your decisions belong to you, you stop blaming circumstances and stop expecting other people to rescue you from the consequences. Start practicing this in small ways. Make a decision without immediately asking 5 people what they think. Say no without constructing a 20-minute explanation. Express an honest opinion without checking whether everyone agrees. That message is far more powerful than any compliment another person can give you. Eventually, something changes. You become less desperate to be understood, less frightened of rejection, less willing to betray your principles simply to maintain someone's approval. And this is the beginning of a different kind of confidence, not the confidence of someone trying to appear powerful, but the quiet strength of someone who no longer needs permission to be themselves. Stop asking the world to confirm your worth. Build a life that confirms it for you. Because confidence is not truly tested when everything is going your way. It is tested when someone insults you, rejects you, disrespects you, ignores you, or deliberately tries to provoke you. This is where many people reveal how little control they actually possess. Someone says something cruel, and they immediately respond. Someone withdraws attention, and they start chasing. Someone challenges their status, and suddenly they feel compelled to prove themselves. They believe they are defending their dignity, but if I can predict what will make you angry, I can influence you. If I know what will make you insecure, I can manipulate you. If I understand exactly what you fear losing, I can pressure you through that fear. This is why emotional control is not emotional weakness. It is strategic strength, and emotional control does not mean becoming cold or emotionless. That is a misunderstanding. Your emotions contain information. Anger can tell you that a boundary has been crossed. Fear can warn you about danger. There needs to be a space between what happens to you and what you do about it. That space is where your power exists. Imagine someone criticizes you publicly. Your first instinct may be to defend yourself. But instead of reacting immediately, pause. Ask yourself, why did that statement affect me? Is there truth in it? Is this person trying to help me, or simply trying to provoke me? What response actually serves my interests? Notice what happens when you begin asking these questions. The emotional intensity starts to lose its authority. You are no longer inside the reaction. When you step back from your emotions, you can see the situation as a strategist rather than as a victim. And sometimes the strongest response is no response at all. Silence can communicate that you are not easily controlled. Walking away can communicate that your attention has value. A calm sentence can be more powerful than an angry speech, because it demonstrates that the other person failed to dictate your emotional state. But this requires practice. You cannot expect to become emotionally disciplined during a crisis if you have spent your entire life reacting impulsively. When you feel the urge to prove yourself, ask whether proving yourself is actually necessary. Over time, you develop something extremely valuable, a delay between stimulus and response, and within that delay lies freedom. The person who controls your reactions controls a piece of your life. Take that control back. Master your reaction, and you become much harder to manipulate. And once you learn to control your reactions, you begin to discover another source of strength, the ability to be alone without feeling abandoned. This is difficult for many people because solitude forces you to confront yourself without distraction. When there is always someone to text, someone to impress, someone to chase, or someone whose attention you are trying to maintain, you can avoid uncomfortable questions about your own life. But remove the noise, and those questions become impossible to escape. Who are you when nobody is watching? What do you actually want when you are not trying to impress anyone? What standards would you maintain if you knew there would be no applause for maintaining them? These questions are uncomfortable because many people have built their identity around being needed. They confuse attention with value. They confuse companionship with connection. They confuse. When you are terrified of losing someone, you become willing to tolerate things you would normally reject. You overlook disrespect. You accept inconsistent behavior. You chase explanations. You keep sending messages when the other person has already made their position clear. Not because the relationship is necessarily valuable, but because the possibility of being alone feels unbearable. And that fear gives the other person enormous psychological power. This is why learning to walk away is such an important part of confidence. There is a profound philosophical idea behind this. You cannot control what other people choose to do, but you can control what you are willing to participate in. Someone may reject you, someone may misunderstand you, someone may leave, someone may decide that they no longer value the relationship. You cannot prevent any of these things, but you can decide whether you will abandon yourself trying to prevent them. That is the distinction between attachment and dependence. Healthy attachment allows another person to enrich your life. Dependence makes another person responsible for your sense of worth. And the more dependent you become, the more frightened you are of honesty. You stop saying what you really think because you fear the consequences. You stop setting boundaries because you fear being abandoned. Eventually, you are no longer maintaining a relationship. You are maintaining an illusion of security. Solitude breaks that illusion. Spend time alone deliberately. Learn to enjoy your own company. Work on something without needing anyone to notice. Go somewhere without needing someone beside you. Sit quietly with your thoughts. Let yourself experience boredom, uncertainty, and even loneliness without knowing. You realize that rejection is an event, not an identity, and you realize that losing someone does not automatically mean losing yourself. This changes how you enter relationships. You stop approaching people from the position of, "Please choose me." Instead, you approach from, "Let us see whether we are genuinely good for each other." That is a completely different psychological position. You are no longer begging for acceptance. You are evaluating compatibility. And once you reach that point, your relationships become healthier, your decisions become clearer, and your confidence becomes far less dependent on circumstances. And once you become comfortable standing alone, you face the next question: how do you actually build confidence that does not collapse the moment life becomes difficult? The answer is simple, but most people resist it because it requires work. You have to give yourself evidence. People often think confidence comes first and action follows. In reality, it is usually the opposite. You act despite uncertainty, you survive the difficulty, and then your mind records the experience as proof. You cannot convince yourself that you are courageous while continually avoiding every situation that frightens you. The mind pays attention to behavior. Somewhere beneath your conscious thoughts, you are keeping a record of what you repeatedly do. Every broken promise weakens that record. Every kept promise strengthens it. This is why small commitments matter more than dramatic declarations. If you tell yourself you will wake up at a certain time, do it. If you decide to exercise, show up. And eventually, something changes. You begin to trust yourself. because you have accumulated evidence that you can depend on yourself. This is also why discomfort is so valuable. Most people organize their lives around avoiding discomfort. They avoid difficult conversations, difficult work, rejection, uncertainty, and failure. But every time you escape something merely because it feels uncomfortable, you teach your brain a dangerous lesson. Discomfort means retreat. Reverse that pattern. You fail and survive. You struggle and continue. You become embarrassed and recover. You face uncertainty and discover that you can function without having all the answers. These experiences create psychological evidence that affirmations cannot manufacture. And there is another important principle here. Do not measure confidence by how little fear you experience. Measure it by what you are willing to do while fear is present. A confident person is not necessarily someone who feels no anxiety. Then act. Confidence grows afterward. This is why the process must be gradual. You don't need to reinvent your entire personality overnight. You need to create a pattern of behavior that your mind cannot ignore. One disciplined decision, one uncomfortable action, one promise kept, then another, and another. Eventually, the person you are becoming becomes impossible for you to deny. You no longer need constant reassurance, because you have something stronger than reassurance. Experience. You have seen yourself endure. You have seen yourself adapt. Start giving yourself reasons to trust yourself. And once you have begun building evidence that you can trust yourself, another transformation takes place. You become less desperate to explain yourself. This is a subtle form of confidence, but one of the most powerful. Think about how often people feel compelled to justify their choices. They explain why they said no. They explain why they left. They explain why they changed direction. We want people to see our intentions correctly. We want them to understand that we are not selfish, arrogant, weak, or cruel. So we keep explaining, adding more words, more evidence, more arguments, hoping that eventually the other person will give us the approval we are looking for. But there is a trap here. The more desperately you try to control someone's interpretation of you, the more power you give that person over you. You cannot control another person's perception. Two people can watch you do exactly the same thing. One may see discipline, another may see arrogance. If your peace depends on everyone choosing the interpretation you prefer, you have created an impossible psychological task for yourself. This does not mean you should never explain yourself. Communication matters. If someone genuinely misunderstands you and the relationship is valuable, clarification can be wise. The problem begins when explanation becomes a form of begging. There is a difference between communicating and defending your existence. A confident person can say, "This is my decision," without turning that sentence into a courtroom argument. They can say no without producing an elaborate justification. They can disagree without becoming hostile. And perhaps most importantly, they can tolerate being misunderstood. That last ability requires maturity. You have to accept that some people will construct a version of you that has very little connection to reality. They may criticize you because your choices challenge their expectations. They may dislike your boundaries because those boundaries prevent them from getting what they want from you. You do not have to correct every accusation. Sometimes your greatest response is simply to continue behaving consistently with your values. This is where reputation and character. If you spend your life protecting your reputation, you become reactive. Every criticism demands a response. Every rumor becomes a crisis. Every disagreement becomes something you must win. But if you build character, you become much harder to disturb. You know who you are because your actions have already answered the question. And there is tremendous freedom in that. You can speak when speaking is useful. You can remain silent when silence is wiser. You can explain when clarification serves a purpose. And because the moment you stop needing everyone to understand you, you recover an enormous amount of psychological energy. You can redirect that energy toward your work, your relationships, your goals, and your own development. Let people misunderstand you if they must. Your life does not need to be a courtroom. Asterisk, you do not need to prove who you are when your actions already know. And when you have learned to trust yourself, control your reactions, stand comfortably alone, keep promises to yourself, and stop needing to explain every decision, you arrive at the final transformation. Your attention becomes more valuable than other people's approval. This is where confidence. Most people spend an enormous amount of psychological energy monitoring how they are perceived. They wonder who likes them, who is talking about them, who noticed their success, who ignored their message, who approved of their decision. Their attention is constantly moving outward. And wherever your attention goes, your energy follows. If your attention is permanently occupied by other people's opinions, you have very little left for building your own life. This is why having a mission matters. A mission it can be a craft you want to master, a business you want to build, a body you want to develop, a family you want to protect, a skill you want to acquire, or simply the decision to become a stronger and more disciplined version of yourself. The specific goal matters less than the direction. Without direction, the mind becomes vulnerable to distraction. You begin measuring your life through comparison. Someone else's success makes you feel behind. Someone else's relationship makes you question your own. Someone else's success makes you feel behind. You are too occupied with becoming to spend all day worrying about being perceived. This is one of the most important psychological shifts you can make. Instead of asking, "How do I look?" you begin asking, "What am I building?" Instead of asking, "Do they respect me?" you ask, "Am I becoming someone I respect?" Instead of asking, "Why did they reject me?" you ask, "What can I learn, and where do I go from here?" These questions return power to you, and this is not about becoming obsessed with productivity or turning yourself into a machine. A meaningful mission should not make you incapable of rest or connection. It should give your life a center of gravity. When you have that center, rejection becomes information rather than a verdict. Failure becomes feedback rather than an identity. Criticism becomes something to evaluate rather than something that automatically destroys you. Even success changes. You no longer need applause to make achievement feel real because the achievement itself has meaning. This is what makes a person difficult to manipulate. Manipulation often works by exploiting emotional dependencies. The need to be admired, the fear of abandonment. You can walk away from what conflicts with your values because your entire identity is not attached to one person, one opportunity, or one audience. And notice how all the previous lessons connect. You trust your judgment. You control your reactions. You can stand alone. You keep promises to yourself. You stop desperately explaining yourself. And now you have somewhere meaningful to direct your energy. That is the architecture of durable confidence. Not arrogance, not aggression. Build something that matters to you, and let your actions accumulate in silence. Because once your life becomes more important to you than other people's opinions of it, you become remarkably difficult to control. Asterisk, stop performing for the world. Build a life so meaningful that you no longer need its applause. Asterisk,